participating in this community town hall. My name is Troy Keaton, and I'm the senior pastor here at East Lake Community Church. And we are honored to be a part of this great community. And we happen to be one of the larger venues in this community. So when we were asked, we said, sure, we'd be happy to host this, and are honored that all of you have come and that the Congressman is here. And Vicki Gardner and Tim Gardner. Vicki Gardner is our executive director of our Chamber of Commerce, and she is here. And Vicki, don't we need a community center? All right. Vicki and I are working on that project. Let me just give you a couple pieces of housekeeping information. If you're interested in the restroom, out that door and straight across the hall, men on the left, ladies on the right. That's not too hard to figure out. We keep it pretty simple here. The other thing that they wanted me to say is we're going to do this. We're here to have a great conversation. We're not here to have a parade or a show. So the church, this is the church. Obviously, there's nothing special about the building. There is something special about the person sitting next to you who is made in the image of God. And so we're going to be respectful, not because of brick and mortar, but because of flesh and blood. And we have, as a church, we're neutral in this. We've opened up our venue, but we have asked both them and everybody here, we asked this evening that you would respect the venue that we're in. That's why there's no signs in here. It's not Tom Garrett, because Tom Garrett's not the reason there's no signs in here. I'm the reason there's no signs in here. So if you don't like that, sue me. But anyways, we are going to follow a very simple pattern. No clapping, booing, cheering, or hissing. In other words, don't be disruptive. This is a private facility. If somebody is disruptive, it's very simple. We have a staff here at our church that's going to ask you to not be disruptive anymore. And if you want to keep being disruptive, law enforcement's here, and they will help us with that. As I was looking at these, Kevin, I'm thinking, can we not get these rules for Sunday morning? No hissing, no booing. You know what I'm saying? This isn't even fair. I don't even get to do this on Sundays. Respect the moderators. Obviously, there'll be time for question and answer. Respect the moderators and the time constraints that are involved in that. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. So would you bow your heads and join me for a word of prayer as we begin? Father, I thank you tonight that you are a good God. You're wise and faithful, and you're loving, and you're kind and compassionate. And Lord, you're a God who raises up leaders and takes them down. And so we trust in your sovereignty and your leadership tonight. We thank you for our own leaders, and as you've taught us in your word to pray, we pray for our rulers and our leaders tonight. And we pray for Tom Garrett as he has been elected from our district. We pray you'd give him wisdom that is your wisdom and wisdom that is best for all people. And we pray your blessing upon this event. Keep us all sane and sensible and acting like we have sense, even if we don't. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So would you join me at this time in welcoming our Congressman Tom Garrett. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Okay, am I supposed to say some opening words? This is good. I didn't know that. I want to thank everybody for being here from every ideological perspective, both sides of the aisle today. We had the opportunity to speak at Chatham High School, at Gretna High School, and one of the questions was, what do you think about protesters who break stuff and burn things? And I said, well, let me break that down into two separate questions. Protesting is the fundamental right and duty of Americans from our very beginning, right? When Crispus Attucks shed his lifeblood on the square in Boston, it was protesting against something that he deemed A, worthy of standing up for, and B, worthy ultimately of laying down his life for. So there's no more American behavior. When you break people's things, when you threaten people with violence, that is the antithesis of what it is to be an American. So regardless of who you are or why you're here, God bless you and welcome. I want to tell you that I, in good faith, discharge my duties with the full weight of the responsibility that it should bear to represent the 5th District in Congress and I consider that to be pretty substantial. I was a history major, so indulge me for 30 seconds. The 5th District of Virginia was first represented in the House of Representatives by the father of the Constitution, James Madison. The father of the Declaration of Independence lived here. The father of the modern Supreme Court, John Marshall, retired here. Patrick Henry retired here. James Moneta ran to represent the 5th and lost, and ultimately became a senator and the President of the United States. The American Civil War ended here, and the Civil Rights Movement in Virginia began here. So understand this. I know that if I'm about the 10th best political figure from the 5th District, I've done my job well. But I do take it very seriously, and I'm doing the very best I can to make the very best decisions I can in accordance with who I said I was when I ran for office. And I think I'm doing that. And to the extent we disagree, that's good, because that's the fundamental nature of a democracy in America. But if we could have a sort of respectful forum, what the whole key for us in these is, does my 75-year-old mom who's had 2 knee replacements feel safe sitting on the front row? And so far, on all the public appearances we've had at 18 high schools, University of Virginia twice, here, et cetera, that the answer has been yes. And that's what we owe people, is a forum where anyone can come and either agree or dissent, but feel safe. And so thank you, and God bless you, and let's do this.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm Kevin Reynolds. I'm the chief moderator. If you look over here, Andrew Griffith, he is our deputy moderator. We're going to have a very open line of questioning tonight. In other words, you put your hand up, we'll ask you to ask the question. You have 30 to 45 seconds. What we don't want is monologuing, and that goes for you too, Congressman. If you get to going, I'm gonna give you the wrap it up symbol. So we don't have wrap it up music to play like the Oscars, but that's gonna be the wrap it up music. So what we want to do is ask good, solid questions in the interest of brevity, so we can get everybody's questions answered. Just ask you to do that succinctly in 30 to 45 seconds. And we're going to alternate sides, and we're just going to go to hands. And we're scheduled to go to 7:30. We might go into overtime like we did at Virginia, and that's going to be fun. So we're looking forward to doing that. And so I'll go ahead and open it up. Put your hands up.
Kevin, let me ask one thing.
I saw you first. Yes.
If folks who have questions could give a name, it can be first name, last name, whatever, but so I can speak to them or with them.
Okay. Go ahead and stand up for me. I'll hold the microphone.
Okay. Hi, Congressman. My name is Liz Baya. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia. My question may go for 60 seconds. I hope that's okay. I'm stretching the rules a little bit. My father passed away when I was 23 years old. He passed away from pneumonia. He had had it a few times before he passed away. I understand that it's pretty common in hospice care and long-term care to get pneumonia. He was in hospice care because he had brain cancer. He was diagnosed when I was 15. By the time I left for college, after surgery and radiation and chemotherapy, he wasn't really there anymore. But in a lot of senses, my dad was lucky. He was a doctor, and it is true what they say, doctors are the worst patients. He made his doctors such lives hell. But he had a good job. He had good money, and he had good benefits. But if he had lost those benefits at any point in the 8 years he fought cancer, there's no way he would have been able to afford getting coverage back, because a brain tumor is a hell of a pre-existing condition. And the reason that would have been true is because my dad got sick before Obamacare. Obamacare made it illegal for insurers to charge people more because of their pre-existing conditions, and as I'm sure you know, the bill you voted for last week would take that away and allow insurance companies to do that again. So my question is, what did my dad do to make you think that he deserves to pay more, would have deserved to pay more, because he got sick?
Right, so it's amazing the number of stories that can be told as it relates to cancer. When I was about 10, my mom was diagnosed with terminal, and I stress that because that was the diagnosis, cancer. That would have been about 34 years ago. My father, the greatest influence in my life, refused to take no for an answer, if you will. And one of the memories that I have is listening through the wall between what was my bedroom and what functioned as his office as he dialed the phone. There's no internet. Dialed the phone and dialed the phone and dialed the phone. And Johns Hopkins said sorry. And MCV said sorry, and UVA said sorry, and Sloan Kettering said sorry, and the Mayo Clinic said sorry. And ultimately, the University of Pittsburgh said, put her in the car and bring her up. She probably won't go home, but it's what we got. April 10th, she celebrated her 75th birthday, and my father, ironically, who took better care of himself than anybody I know, was diagnosed with cancer in August of 2011 and died December 13th, 2011. It consumed him. But my mom had, for the years since, had a pre-existing condition, and I can assure you my father didn't reach the level of success or attainment that yours did. He was a real estate agent, not a doctor. And yet we were able to, number one, maintain care for my mother, and number two, create a circumstance wherein, even with that pre-existing condition, she was able to beat cancer 2 more times. And so I think I won't discount anyone's personal story, because I could go on another 30 seconds, particularly about my dad, and not be in good shape to be here right now. But I think there's a little bit of mischaracterization as it relates to the bill that passed last week. Let me give you an example. The one place where we've seen prices not spiral out of control as it relates to the segment of the population that drives the vast bulk of health care costs, that is folks with pre-existing conditions, folks in high-risk pools, is Maine. And there's a concept that I first learned about in government class in high school, which is 50 laboratories for democracy. And that is where you let the states engage in different practices. Ultimately, you will find the best practice. What they've done in Maine, and what we seek to do through the Palmer Amendment in this bill, is create a circumstance where folks like my mother and your father, who are in high-risk pools, can receive care where the marketplace determines the cost, but that care is subsidized. The current funding for people with pre-existing conditions, or the high-risk pool folks, sits at $138,000 million. And it may need to go higher. But right now, that's a commitment sufficient to me that I feel that inside that marketplace, you will be able to subsidize folks like your father and my mother who deserve care. Having said that, the goal for me, not for the ACHA, but for me, was how can we create a paradigm where we drive down costs of premiums and deductibles? Because what we've known prior to the ACA, to be completely fair, and subsequent to the ACA at an accelerated rate, is that 2 things grow at a meteoric upward bound, and that's higher ed costs and healthcare costs. So how do you drive them down? Well, if you isolate folks like my mom and your dad, and you subsidize their care because they're entitled to care, and from the 95%, then the cost for the 95% has to fall, because 50% of the cost drivers in the care structure are folks like my mom and your dad. Now, so the end, what galls me to no end is the "you don't care about people" argument, because I know my story as well as anybody other than maybe my mom and sister. What we're trying to do is create a paradigm where people have access to affordable care. Here's the problem. There was a newspaper story that came out a month ago that said 67% of Americans couldn't find $1,000 in a financial pinch. The OMB scoring of the original HCA, which I opposed because I did not believe it would move down premiums and deductibles, said 24 million people lose coverage. The key word here shouldn't be coverage. The key word here should be care, because if your deductible is $6,000 but you can't find $5,000 in the pinch and you got coverage, you don't have care. So let's take animosity aside and understand that what you want and what I want, care for folks like your dad and my mom, are the same thing, and the arguments over how do we get from point A to point B. And there we can fundamentally disagree. So if you believe a single payer system's better, that's fine. I don't. Okay, and you know what? That's awesome. I don't think that's the right answer, but I respect that. Don't impugn the integrity of those who think that the market system might be a better option. You may be right, I may be wrong, but it's an honest disagreement, not a disagreement over who's evil and wants to hurt people.
Well, Congressman, you mentioned Maine as an example. Senator Collins from Maine has said that she does not believe the AHCA in any way resembles the high-risk pools they have in that state, because the AHCA puts $8 billion toward high-risk pools. Independent experts have estimated that those high-risk pools would need $200 billion to be successful. That's a 3% funding. My question is, would your mother still be here today? And I thank God that she is here today if she only received 3% of the care that she needed to get better.
Well, she's here today, and she did what she did prior to the Obamacare paradigm. The question is, if she had options that extended none beyond Obamacare, would she be here today? Right? Ultimately, when we're promised more choices and we have fewer, my question is, if my mom had had her cancer during Obamacare, would she be here today? Not would she be here today because she didn't have Obamacare, because she's here, right? But there's an $8 billion increase in the $130 billion already allocated as it relates to subsidizing folks with pre-existing conditions. So the total number is $138 billion, not $8 billion.
Start right over here.
Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Phyllis Bearer. I live here in Moneta. I'm a pediatric speech-language pathologist, and I serve the area, the larger area. My question is not about health care, though. It's about Social Security and Medicare. My question is 45 seconds. I timed it last night. I've paid into Social Security and Medicare for 44 years. I am about 6 years from retirement. Speaker Ryan has made it known that he wants to, for a long time, he would like to dismantle these programs, which help avoid old age poverty and catastrophic medical bills or bankruptcy. When his father died, thank God, Paul Ryan was able to collect Social Security benefits that helped pay for his college. Do you agree with the president's tax plan, which could allow a 15% pass-through rate where people can reclassify their income as small business income, causing a dramatic cut in FICA payments collected? Or with Speaker Ryan, who has talked about a voucher system or means testing or giving our hard-earned safe money to Wall Street or excluding our younger citizens for participation in these programs? Do you believe those things would better serve your constituents? I'm 59 years old this week. My daughters are millennials. They've been paying into Social Security and Medicare for 10 to 15 years.
Right.
And thank you very much.
So let me ask her this. Do you specifically mentioned means testing, and do you agree with means testing? Now that's one tiny part. I'm curious.
I do not, because if we have means testing, then it becomes a program much like we might look at welfare or Medicaid for the people who can't afford it. Then I'm afraid that Social Security becomes, oh, it's only for those people.
So,
and we may not have people buying into the program.
So I really appreciate that, because what we've got, ma'am, and your name, I apologize, your name again? Phyllis, is a really neat example of somebody who's thinking for themselves and not following sort of a party paradigm march. And I'm pretty proud of doing that myself. I will tell you that they'll cut Social Security benefits for people vested in the system over my dead body. Let me tell you what we need to focus on, though, and that is the long-term viability of the program. What we have that I'm really proud of, and Elliot Harding is in the back of the room and can take a hat tip here, is a program to ensure the long-term viability of the program. There is, and the vast experience that I have, the vast bulk of the experience I have in governments at the state level, and in Virginia we do a really good job of balancing the budget, et cetera, but there's one outlier that kind of gets us, and that's the Virginia retirement system. And there's a perpetual fight between people who want to reduce benefits for people vested in VRS, and who I am not one of, and people who want to change the benefits that we give people who vest in VRS later. In other words, don't break the promise you made yesterday, make a different promise tomorrow. My mom's dependent upon Social Security. It's the first forum like this I've had in years my mom's not at, and all I'm talking about is my mom. But you don't yank that rug out from underneath the people. However, you have to recognize that the actuary tables tell us that at some point we're going to run out of money, whether it's because birth rates change, and you've got obviously the baby boom generation coming into the Social Security eligibility ages, in a relatively compressed period of time. The reason I asked Elliot to wave his hand is to solve problems, not to kick cans down the road, you got to do things differently than people have done them before. So I'm going to ramble here. If you give me the high sign, I'm ignoring it. So we identified two real problems. The first was what Senator Sanders talked about a lot during his campaign, and that is student loan debt. Now, I'm a free market guy. I believe the student loan debt crisis originates from a desire to ensure that everybody can have any money they want to study, anything for any period of time without regard for potential ability to repay that loan. However, whether the genesis is that or something else, the reality is we've taken an entire generation, millennials, and we've just sort of sucked them right out of the productive workforce, excuse me, by encumbering them with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 worth of debt per person. What's that do? Well, number one, you slow the economic activity by virtue of people who can't get a car loan, can't get a home loan, can't start a family. I think Ms. Clinton made a remark about not being able to move out of mom's house. But the worst thing that does to our nation and our economy is ultimately, I believe, that the chief generator of economic activity, revenue, and jobs is ideas. And the idea generation is always that generation that's just coming up. The things that millennials imagine that Mark Zuckerberg came up with that seems completely simple now, sort of revolutionized how we communicate with friends and neighbors, and that millennial can't get a small business loan. So how do you attack a long-term lack of viability for Social Security, keep the promise that you made, and tackle the student loan problem? And what we've done is put out a bill called Student Security, which what it would do is allow people who have student loan debt at their own choice to retire student loan debt in lieu of receipt of Social Security benefits for a period of time up to $100,000 over 10 years. It's funny, I don't see...
No hissing, please.
Ma'am, honestly, if you could conduct yourself with a modicum of respect and not tell my pregnant wife to shut up. I mean, truly.
Ma'am.
I disagree with you, you disagree with me, but I'm calling you ma'am. That's the difference between you and I.
Ma'am, please do not be disruptive.
I haven't met a millennial, including myself, who still sits on $50,000+ worth of student loan debt, who wouldn't take that deal. Haven't met one. Okay, we're going to keep working towards it, and I look forward to meeting you guys. But ultimately what it does is it allows you to escape from that student loan debt by your own choice. So good news for you is you don't have to take that deal. And ma'am, I'll tell you what, we have two moderators. Raise your hand and I promise they'll get to you. What that does is it allows people to escape from that dark cloud of student loan debt and make decisions for themselves with the full knowledge and benefit of the bargain that they chose to make that decision for themselves. And candidly, at age 45, if I could get out from underneath of my over $50,000 of student loan debt by doing this and receive my Social Security 5 years later, I'd take it in a heartbeat. But when we do that, what we do is we extend the viability of Social Security for perpetuity. We don't need to break the promise that we made yesterday, and we allow people to either choose to enter or not enter a different promise tomorrow. And that's thinking outside the box, and that's how you solve problems.
I have a fast follow-up, if I may.
Sure,
Thank
Phyllis.
you. A couple of ideas that have been thrown out, because I am a boomer. We paid double because we were a big chunk of the population. Social Security and Medicare, raising the salary cap, taxing capital gains, placing a minuscule transaction fee on stock trades, because my fear is if the millennials and those younger do not pay in, everything's going to collapse. So thank you for
thank you a lot. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, I'm up next. All right, ma'am. Obviously, you got a little something to say, so let's see. Go ahead and stand up. I'll hold on to that.
I am Loretta Merriman. I have taught school in many counties for 35 years. I've taught many grades and many subject areas. My son has graduated from Virginia Tech recently in 2012. He majored in the engineering department with software development. He is a very smart person. He graduated with $40,000 of debt. He is still paying it, but he also pays in to the Social Security program. And you say choose between Social Security, or you say choose your student loan to pay off, that is called no solution at all.
Okay.
And what was your question? No, well, that was a statement. Okay, everybody.
No, Kevin, let me address the statement. It's
Roger.
a statement, not a question. So, the reality of the world we live in is that when the promise of Social Security was made, the life expectancy was different than it is today, right? I'm not trying to take anybody's Social Security. I'm trying to ensure that everyone has Social Security. If your son's not interested in this program, he shouldn't take the program, right? That's the beauty of the program, is that it offers the choice to the individual whether they enter the program or not. And so if your son chooses, and so if you're, ma'am, I didn't interrupt you. Kevin, let her have a follow-up.
I will.
She's going to give you a follow-up, but don't interrupt me and I won't interrupt you. So he can choose to enter the program, or he can choose not to enter the program. What I'm suggesting is that I'd rather not be making payments on the remainder of my student loan debt right now, knowing full well that I'd vest at 69. He would have to back off to erase his student loan debt entirely. He'd have to back off 4 years. But if he'd rather have Social Security payments, he doesn't have to. That's more freedom of choice pushed down to the American citizen, I think creates better outcomes for better people. It's, I guess, a fundamental faith in the individual.
So when my son, when he gets his student loan paid off, will his Social Security that he pays in be compromised because of a stupid policy that you support?
Well, it's not a stupid policy that I support. It's my stupid policy.
The Freedom Caucus plans to take
No.
everything away from everybody.
No, ma'am. I want you
Yes,
to.
they do. You can look on the internet. You can look on CNN. That is the truth.
Well, there's all sorts of stuff you can look on and find on the internet.
Oh, but I go
May or
to the
may-
most
may or may not
trusted
be
news
true.
source. I don't listen to Fox.
All right, thank you, ma'am. If you have any more questions, we're going to move on to somebody else. No clapping, please.
The fundamental beauty of the system is that nobody gives away anything unless they decide to for themselves.
Ma'am, we're going to move on to another
Your son
questioner.
wouldn't have to enter the program. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. At the same age he would normally get it, unless he chooses. I chose to serve in the Army, but we're not making people do it. No, yeah. I'm not taking anything from anybody. You go. Right.
Congratulations. You got a check, Tom. All right.
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful for the minute check.
It's more like a check minus, I think.
The 2011 VT grad, I would opt into it.
Hi, my name is Nancy Rodlin. I'm from Greene County, and I supported and voted for you, and I applaud this town hall. And I would like to ask a question. Before I ask the question, I'd like to say that thank you for keeping your promises, your campaign promises, and working on them. Thank you. So my question is this, it's brief. Do you plan on insisting that the 2018 budget pass through regular order, meaning no more omnibus bills?
Yes. I learn something new every day in Washington, D.C. We have, and this is a pox on both houses, it's been a decade-ish since we've actually passed a budget through regular order, and that's a disservice to the people who elect us, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on. And you know what we need to do. I've joked, and I'm in a sanctuary now, so I've got to be careful that the road to hell is paved with omnibus legislation. The whole, we don't know if we can get X, Y, or Z, so we'll cram it in with PD and Q because everybody loves PD and Q. And again, both parties are equally guilty of it, and it's shameful. So it's about transparency. It's about honesty and knowing full well that there can be things that might be a showstopper for me as a member that other people feel, entirely differently about. But, existentially, it's hard for anyone to put into perspective $20 trillion in debt. But I'll try. There was a newspaper story about 3 months ago that said that the wealthiest 8 individuals on the planet Earth controlled as much wealth as the bottom 50 percentile of the entire population of the planet. So roughly 7 billion people on Earth right now. Take 3.5 billion, the bottom 50 percentile, add the wealthiest 8 people on the planet, and you've got a lot of money. Apply every dime of those 3.5 billion and 8 people to the current U.S. debt, not unfunded liability, but debt. And what percentage do you suppose we could pay off? It's under 10%. So the reality is right now, if you look at the founders, if you look at enumerated powers and what the appropriate roles of government at each level are, and you look at where we spend now, we're totally disengaged. We don't function in the world we wish we functioned in, we function in the world we're in. So the fact that we're beyond the left and right limit of what was contemplated as federal government responsibilities is something that's a philosophical, interesting conversation, but one person isn't going to change that overnight. Having said that, at some point we have to make tough decisions, which means that some people won't get reelected, and that's okay, because when getting reelected is more important than doing what's best for the nation, you're probably in the wrong field of endeavor anyway. So we have to make tough budget decisions. I think the way to do it is to pass a series of budgets vis-a-vis regular order as opposed to continuing resolutions, and I think we need to start holding folks on either side of the aisle accountable for governing via continuing resolution. It's good to know there are questions.
Sorry, I got trapped behind the press. It's all right. Ma'am?
My name is Susan Loy. I'm from Moneta. You're a member of the Freedom Caucus, and as a member, you demanded that the House leaders give ample time to read legislation, examine the CBO report, and weigh in before a health care bill comes up for a vote. Yet, you nonetheless voted on a health care bill that you admitted, oh gosh, that you hadn't even read.
No. Well, go ahead.
How do you justify your duplicity? How can your constituents trust you in the future?
Please, no clapping. No clapping. No clapping.
So,
please be courteous.
So, not only did our team read that bill, I would wager that if you line me up against any member of either party as it relates to the intricacies of the final evolution of the AHCA, and we have a debate, that I could equip myself very well, thank you very much. The reality of this is that the AHCA that we voted on a week ago was not a new bill. It was instead a series of about 8 or 9 amendments to a bill that had been on the floor and discussed over a period of time equal to about 3 times as much as what the original Affordable Care Act was contemplated. So yes, it is true. Yes, it is true. What we have are additions to the...
Outbursts are not tolerated. Please, everyone, be respectful of the people around you and be respectful of the Congressman just as we're respectful of you.
I'll tell you what, my standard would be, if your kids could see you, would you be embarrassed? Or would they be embarrassed? I mean, because if I were shouting over people, my kids would be like, Dad, stop, it's embarrassing. So that's just, maybe my kids have a different standard. Ultimately, the bill wasn't new. The bill was a series of about 8 or 9 different amendments made to the original bill. The entirety of the legislation, from conception to passage, was out there for a significant period longer than the original AHCA was. That was what I lamented as I related to, we have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. When you look at the volume of the original monstrosity, literally, if you believe that any particular individual, without regard for a team they were paid to assemble to do a job, had read the glossary and the table of contents, you can labor under that presumption. But what we do is surround ourselves with folks like Elliot, whose job it is to take subparts of the text, come back, sit down, and go, what does this, and this do? How does this addition change the original bill? But I would argue that the genesis of the AHCA that passed isn't 2 weeks ago, it's months ago. They're here, I think.
Channel 7, Channel 10, you lie. If you tell them what Freedom Caucus is all about, no one will
All right. Moving on. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Garrett, my name is Gloria Bradley. I'm with Indivisible, the Indivisible chapter that's in Danville, Virginia, but we're part of the 5th District. I would like to know if you could please defend the Trump Care bill that, based on its merits, particularly in regards to tax cuts for the 1%. On the merits, particularly in regards to the tax cuts for the 1%, or those making over $200,000 per year, while taking that money, the same amount of money, from Medicaid and the most vulnerable, like me.
Is that Medicaid or Medicare?
Medicaid.
Because if you
I'm talking about the 1% that you're the 1% that you are taking money from, taking the money from from Medicaid and what? From the poor and giving to the rich. I'm not seeing Trump Care.
Okay, so the original Affordable Care Act robbed Medicare of nearly $1 trillion, $800 million. Yeah, it did. Google it. Google it. I mean, what we've seen under the Affordable Care Act is the antithesis of affordable care. We've seen premiums double, triple, quadruple. You can Google all this stuff too. We've seen deductibles double, triple, quadruple. You can Google all this stuff too. We've seen, if I am to digress for a moment, a period of 8 years with not a single quarter of economic growth over 4%, where under not the best president ever, George W. Bush, we saw multiple quarters during 2004, 2005, 2006. Ultimately, the goal of the AHCA is to ensure more people have actual access to care, not to a piece of paper that is coverage that they can't afford to pay the deductible for. So we might disagree on the means to the end, and if you believe a single-payer system is better, that's okay. That's all right, right? In fact, what would really have been nice is if somebody from the other side of the aisle would have put forth a bill and said what Bill Clinton said, what Hillary Clinton said, what the governor of Minnesota said, and that is that the ACA is failing, we need to do something differently, so that we could have voted on it. But there was nothing but political gamesmanship with no bills, right? President Bill Clinton said, and I quote, "Obamacare is the craziest thing." Presidential hopeful and Democrat governor of Minnesota said, "This is not sustainable. We can't afford the Affordable Care Act." So there's been no offers of help from the other side of the aisle, and what we have here is a program where there's been...
Folks, there are other folks here that don't agree with you, but nobody is shouting over you or laughing over you. So why don't we go ahead and just be respectful, please.
So ultimately, if you either want to solve a problem or you want to score political points. You can disagree until the cows come home with the AHCA, but what you have here is a good faith effort by a group of people who are actually trying to solve an identified problem, not identified simply by them, but by former President Clinton, Mrs. Clinton, and a 2020 presidential hopeful who's the governor of Minnesota, who happens to be a Democrat. So the proof of the pudding's in the eating. We're going to see continued pain and suffering in health care because we passed the bill out of the House, but we're still waiting on the Senate. So when Aetna leaves Virginia like they did last week, when there's a projection of a 33% increase in health care costs in Virginia and Maryland in the next 12 months, make no mistake about it, it has nothing to do with what we just passed because it's not yet the law. It's reaping what was sown 9 years ago. So we disagree as it relates to the means to the end. But what I think we can agree on is the Affordable Care Act has failed.
All right. I owed Ms. Loy a follow-up question, please. I'm sorry. After the disturbance, I forgot. That's on me.
Okay.
He's tricky like that. You got to keep it on.
Well, I want to follow up on the Affordable Care Act. I'm a small business owner, a C corporation. We don't need a tax break. We need affordable health care, which we had for the first time under the ACA. My rates went down, my employees' rates went down. You're sitting there telling me that rates went sky high and doubled. Ours went down. This is Moneta, Virginia, a small business. This is reality.
Right, except when reality is that I visited with the job creators of about 500 different jobs in Charlottesville yesterday, and every one of them had a different reality than you. So while I don't contest what you're saying and wouldn't question your integrity, the vast bulk of what we hear is we want to do more for our employees' health care. We've been pushed by regulatory climate out of that realm, and we can't retain the employees we want to because we can't provide the benefits we used to because the regulatory scheme is crushing us. So I would offer the hypothetical possibility that your reality is different from that of others.
I had a quick follow-up on this one. Sorry.
Excuse me, Mr. Garrett, but I don't think you answered my question. My question was, please defend the Trump Care bill based on its merits, particularly in regard to the tax cuts for the 1% or those making over $200,000 per year, while taking that same amount of money from Medicaid and the most vulnerable. That was my question.
Okay, so let me defend this bill on the merits. The goal of the bill is to reduce the costs of premiums and deductibles for the end users in healthcare to make actual care as opposed to coverage more accessible to people. That, I think I've said that a few times. I might say it a few more before the night's over, but that is the intended goal of the bill, to reduce the costs of premiums and deductibles so that people actually have care as opposed to coverage that they can't afford because the deductible has risen so high that it's beyond what they have in their emergency savings.
Please, ma'am, wait your turn. Yep, well, you're not next on the list, sorry. Ma'am, please have a seat. Pastor, what's your question?
Okay, I got a question about health care, and I didn't come planning on asking it, but it's a personal story. So I pastor this church, and our insurance was $417 a month. And we actually did get to keep our insurance when Obamacare, because we'd had it long enough. But it went up to $700, $900. Last year it was $1,200, and this year it was going to be $1,500 and some dollars for my wife and I, and we're pretty healthy. She lost a gallbladder last year, but she's over it now. But anyways, in the course of that, we had $9,000 out of pocket at $1,500. That's our story. So my question is, and that's just my story, it's, I might be an aberration, but my question is, this year we went with a Christian healthcare ministry out of Ohio that was written into the ACA as an exemption. It's technically not insurance, but you probably know a little bit about it. But it is legit, and it's working out really good for us. My question is it credible in the new bill? I don't know.
So the story you tell, and I'm not that good at math, is about a 400% rise in an essential expense over a span of about 8 years, right? And I hear the story again and again and again and again. And likewise, I won't question your integrity or suggest that you're not telling the truth. And so what you described, right, and the cost of a brand new Cadillac Escalade has not gone up 400% in the last 8 years, nor has the cost of a Dove ice cream bar or even the cost of college education, although it's close. What you describe as an association plan, there are a series of bills, and I think we're going to make a real difference, not just with an omnibus bill, which of groups to form association plans. So it is the nature of what association is allowed to establish something like a health care plan. So what we've passed is something that would allow, for example, the VEA to have its own association health care plan, or the NRA to have its own association health care plan, or the UMW to have its own association health care plan. We've vastly expanded the ability of groups to form collectives to negotiate better rates in bulk. So that actually not only is covered in the current plan, but it's a route that we're trying to encourage by expanding the number of groups that can do it. Likewise, I think when you vest individuals in making better decisions, you can drive down costs. And so we're also looking to expand the number of folks who have health savings accounts. Another thing that our office has talked about is with people who are on Medicaid, actually taking a percentage of Medicaid benefits and tying them to the recipient so that it becomes their money, so that they're incented to make good decisions. The reason is an emergency room visit as a doctor's visit of first recourse is literally 20 to 100 times more expensive than preventive medicine on the front end. So if we take people in the indigent care pool and give them a certain amount of money each month that goes into an HSA that is theirs, might they not be more likely to go visit a doctor sooner and then save the costs that would have been incurred from a emergency room visit, right? But ultimately the question is how you're paying for it, right? Sir, I'll tell you what, I want to be respectful, but if I want to be respectful. You're right. I'm a terrible person. I want to be respectful, but if I answer queries out of queue from the audience, then soon we have mayhem. So raise your hand and guys, get to this gentleman. And tertiarily, the McCarran-Ferguson repeal that I was a co-sponsor of will also open up opportunities for other groups to come in and compete for access to your care. The more people who have the opportunity to offer you services, the more choices that you get to make as to what services you want and don't want, the lower the costs will go. And that is the end goal of what we're doing here. So McCarran-Ferguson repeal, association healthcare plans, and expansion of HCAs, all of the HCA expansion or HSA expansion is marginally included in the AHCA, but all three of those are coming in separate bills that have already passed. I'm proud to say on the McCarran-Ferguson end, having been a co-patron, that one passed with a bipartisan majority, so hooray.
Good evening, Representative Garrett. My name is John Gendreau, and I'd like to thank you for your service to the country. That's genuine. I do appreciate your time you spent in the Army. Like many Americans, I'm deeply troubled by the Russian hacks into our 2016 election. What I find equally troublesome is the close relationship between the Trump campaign and now the Trump White House and the Russians. The most recent and alarming evidence of these associations with the revelations in the Senate hearing yesterday. The alarm bells of collusion ring when it comes to light that there was a 16-day delay between the White House finding out that the acting Attorney General had spoke to the White House counsel and the time that they relieved Flynn of his duties. Since you've been in office, you've been an outspoken advocate, and by judging on your website, an admirer of Donald Trump and his policies, such as the Muslim ban, as evidenced by the press releases and positions posted therein. So my specific question to you this evening is, will you go on record here and tell your constituents where you'll draw your line in the support for this presidency? In other words, what would it take for you to lose your confidence in the integrity of our 45th president? And I preface this with a breaking news story that's happened since we've been sitting here, that James Comey has been sacked by the Trump administration. He's no longer the FBI director. So, what would it take for you to lose confidence in his administration, be it the conflicts of interest, the emoluments clause, or being found unfit to hold office under the 25th Amendment?
Any. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story, and you can believe me or not, but about 8 Wednesdays ago, I came home from work. I think we run about 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., and I said, sweetheart, I can start an argument with the president in the Oval Office off my bucket list, because I did that today. And that was on the original AHCA, essentially when they said, get in line, it's time to pass something. And we were not only an opponent, but a vocal opponent. And that was really a function of me trying to be true to what I said when I ran for office way back last year. As it relates to Flynn, there are a lot of subcomponents to your question. By the way, did you serve? If you did, thank you. Well, anybody who did, thank you. And people who thank people for serving, thank you. Because you immediately say that, and I get transported back and start seeing faces and it's good to let women and men who did that know, and I'm grateful. But any of those, the question there is where, at what point are you convinced versus at what point am I convinced? I think ultimately, we can play the Flynn game back and forth, we can play the Comey game back and forth. I watched an interview with Ms. Clinton the other day when she pointed specifically to Comey's reopening of the investigation the Sunday before the Tuesday in the election as a seminal event in determining the outcome of the election. So I think as it relates to partisan rancor, Comey's done a pretty good job of ruffling feathers on both sides of the aisle. Candidly, that's usually a pretty good indicator that somebody's doing their job well, right, when they are an equal opportunity offender. As it relates to Flynn and the acting Attorney General, it strikes me as interesting that the Obama administration says that they warned the Trump administration about Flynn being compromised, and yet Mike Flynn held for perpetuity through the change of administration the top-level security clearance awarded to him by the previous administration, right? So if there's a threat, identify and act on the threat, right? Because we've only heard anything to the contrary once it became expedient to sort of justify a subsequent behavior. But, you take an oath to the Constitution and to the people. And I'll tell you that it's an interesting time when the President of the United States is a reality TV star. Having said that, I watched and listened to a lot of people with whom I generally ideologically agree say, well, how are we ever going to survive, this terrible administration wrought upon us by President Obama, and here we sit. So what I would submit is that America has overcome amazing challenges, that Donald Trump is as frightening as he is to some people, small potatoes compared to Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan and all that sort of thing. So he's worse? Yes? And so I guess at the end of the day that my belief is that even when there's someone in the White House that we vehemently disagree with, this great nation will continue to move forward by virtue of the collective of American people whose ideals span, I think, for the better, a broad breadth of potential worldviews. But yeah, if I see a Trump who I think has betrayed his duty to the Constitution, he needs to go. It just happens that I don't see the world through the same sort of opinions as you do. Yes, sir.
Well, to the point, because we have the three branches of government, the separation of powers, and thank goodness there's a person with a background of history and political governance like you, unlike the person who's in the Oval Office, who doesn't seem to have any concept of history, economics, or what's happened to the United States and the Western democracies since World War II. How are you going to protect us from the executive branch that seems to be running amok? And the latest example is the sacking of the FBI director that you just agreed seems to be bipartisan. Well, the only thing that seems to be going on with Comey was that he was directing an investigation into the collusion between Trump and the Russian hacking.
Right, but that investigation is going to go forward in the House and the Senate anyway, right? I mean, so I get what you're coming from.
Is it time to start the special prosecutor?
As it relates to...
Please.
Andrew, a special prosecutor as it relates to President Trump?
Yes, and an independent investigation. I know it's time-consuming, and I know that it's costly, but is it time for an investigation?
Look, I mean, there's some certain percentage of people who would have convened the special investigation on the day after the election. There are investigations ongoing on both sides of the building that are bipartisan in nature, and it was oh my gosh, I believe Barbara Boxer the other day, who when asked if there is hard evidence of collusion said no. So I know I've heard another representative from California say in classified briefings he's seen that. I will tell you I'm privy to an awful lot of classified briefings. I haven't seen that. So, let me say this. Believe it or not, the original test as to who's going to be pliant as it relates to what President Trump wants, we passed. We just passed it because ideologically he wasn't where we thought he needed to be, which put us in agreement with a lot of folks, but for an entirely different reason, right? And so ultimately people wanted me to oppose the original AHCA, and I did. I just didn't do it for the same reason that they wished I would have. Having said that, I'm not doing anything any differently, saying anything any differently, or governing any differently than I did when I ran for the office. That's the duty I think I owe people. And then we'll stand for election again, and we'll either win or we'll lose, right? And that's okay. And again, I said this earlier, if your representative, whether Democrat or Republican, is so tied to re-election that they will compromise, and I use air quotes intentionally because if you compromise core principles, they're not core principles, so that they'll compromise on what they think is right to get reelected. Even if you agree with them, you should fire them. We are descended from a group of people, right, talking about history, and not just once, not just when we stood up against the crown, but when we stood up at the American Civil War and said this institution must go. And when we stood up during the Civil Rights Movement and said, at the risk of my life and to imperil my life, said Barbara Johns, I will stand and fight this. And if our political class is devolved into what do I need to do to make the president happy, we're in real trouble, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. I don't think I'm that guy. I do happen to agree with some points in his agenda, and that disagreement is candidly what makes us who we are. So
Hey, Tom,
I don't know. There was a Supreme Court justice who, when asked about pornography, said, I can't define it, but I'll know it when I see it. And I think that as sort of ethereal as that is, that I'll go there here. But yeah, there's no individual ever who should be bigger than the United States of America. If we allow that, we're no longer the United States of America.
Yep. All right. Go ahead and stand up, sir.
Thank you, sir. My name is Frank Merriman. I live in Rustburg, Virginia. And I have a question which I came to your town hall in Charlottesville, which I was not allowed to ask. But first of all, let me stop and thank you for your service. I mean that sincerely. About what, 1 or 2% of the American public is willing to put the uniform on and serve. And you served, and I want to thank you. And also because, 22 veterans a day commit suicide. So, I always thank veterans. But my question to you, sir, is if you had a loved one who got pregnant by a rape, and they were pregnant by a rape, and the government said, nope, no abortions allowed, how would you answer this young lady if a young lady who was pregnant and the doctor told her that you could die if you had this pregnancy, and the government said, nope, no abortions allowed? How would you answer that? And as I look around the room, I see probably about half the people here are females, and I have not seen any questions related to women's reproductive rights.
So,
my wife's the one who asked a question earlier. She is very much upset. So I apologize for the way she acted.
no, sir. God bless your wife, and I'm sorry. And I'd love to. I'm not proud of that moment. It wasn't my decision, but I respect the law enforcement professionals who protect us, and I'll defend that decision on their part. I believe that I have a massive libertarian streak, right? I was the one who carried the bill in Virginia that eliminated the criminal offense for consensual behavior by people of age in private not-for-pay. From 1619 until 2014, it was illegal to engage in any but the most traditional forms of intimacy with someone of the opposite sex when you were married, and I thought it was stupid that the government was in the business of dictating that. We have a bill now that would remove federal regulatory oversight of marijuana and hemp because I think the states can make fine decisions for themselves. So I've got a giant capital L streak in sort of individual liberty. I believe that it is not the role of government to impugn the morality of one onto another. That is, I may know something is wrong, but it's not the role of the state. It's the role of the individual to sort of speak to people and say, here are my values, this is what I stand for, as it relates to my faith structure. And my walk with God is only not as strong as I want it to be, right? But it's real. Having said that, is the preservation of life the legitimate purview of the government? Foundationally, I would offer that the original document that the founders offered to the world to identify the United States is the Declaration of Independence, wherein they identified life as a fundamental right. Okay? So, moving forward, you have sort of your absolute worst horror story case scenario, wherein you can find a circumstance where it is demonstrably medically the case that one life or the other shall be chosen. I would not say the state should prioritize which life it should be. That's a horrible decision for a mother, hopefully a father, medical professionals, and members of the clergy. Having said that, in other cases where there's conception to include rape, and I'll be clear, I believe that life is sacred and that the fundamental duty of a state and this state is to defend life. So everything we can do should be done to hopefully defend life. The life that's conceived in a horrible act is still life and is still innocent life, separate from the act. Having said that, the entire question sort of is a hypothetical abstract because that's not where we are. What I've done is said, here's Tom, here's what he believes, here's why. So there we go.
And I appreciate your opinion. Everybody has a right to their opinion. It's the First Amendment, which hasn't been repealed yet. But what you're telling me then is the life of the mother doesn't count.
No, that's not what I said at all. Where you have a circumstance wherein it's an either or, where it's truly a medical either or, then, which I haven't seen it, but where there's truly a medical either or, the decision should be made by the pastor, the doctor, the woman, and hopefully her husband. Well, if she's a lesbian, that's why I said hopefully the husband, but it could be the wife, right? The circumstance is the same, and life conceived by lesbians is still sacred, right? I mean, I'm not familiar with life conceived by lesbians, but if it were there, it would be sacred because it's life. Going for the Marco Rubio Water Consumption Award.
Tom, we love you. We love your wife as well. What will it really take to drain the swamp? What departments need to be eliminated? What departments need to be downsized?
Wow. When I was in the Attorney General's office, somebody said, how many lawyers work in the Attorney General's office? And I paraphrased Henry Ford and said, about half of them. You know, it's easy to sit back and throw stones at folks who aren't around to defend themselves. I think redundancy needs to be eliminated. We've looked at what we do here in Virginia with DEQ and DCR as it relates federally to the EPA. What we need to avoid, though, is creating a vacuum with no one to fill, right? I was discussing this with a colleague the other day who said we got to eliminate the EPA. And I said, okay, tell me about that. And he said, well, we're going to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. The vast bulk of the work that's been done has been done by Virginia and Maryland and these people who vested in the Chesapeake Bay, and look at the strides we've made. And somebody said, well, the vast bulk of pollution that was coming into the Chesapeake Bay 20 years ago was coming from Pennsylvania. Therein you established that sort of economic tragedy of the commons where everybody benefits from it, but nobody has a vested interest in maintaining it. So what I'm suggesting here is that we can roll back scope where there's redundancy, but that you need to be careful of unintended consequences. I do believe that there is literally a reverse correlation between American educational attainment and the growth of the federal Department of Education. I mean, as it relates to American performance versus the world. So there's a place to start. Having said that, I'll surprise a lot of you and say that inside the Department of Defense, we have to have procurement reform. We've got those $800 toilet seats that some of you remember from the 80s is shameful. And we've got a bill in that I'm proud of as a member of Homeland Security that looks at the procurement process in Homeland Security and seeks to make sure we're getting the best product for the best price, as opposed to wantonly justifying spending because it's for Homeland Security. So there are any number of departments that can be cut. I think, interestingly, that if you want to diagnose overspending and waste at the federal government level, the best entity to do it is the private sector. So it might be interesting to bring an outside entity in, tell them what we're trying to do, and let them take a good look at how we do it. But I tell people, and we're in deep water here, sort of in political theory, that I'm a big government conservative. And what I mean by that is Jefferson, and I will sort of paraphrase and not quote, said the most effective government is the government closest to home. It governs most accountably, most efficiently, and best. And what we've done is we've identified problems that are real problems. And then we've said, okay, this is a real problem, therefore the federal government needs to do something. And there's a finite amount of resources that we can devote to the problem. Resources translates into dollars, and we take from the locality and send to the federal government. And the administrative cost of moving that money from Moneta to D.C. is a chunk right off the top. So that if we took $100 from Moneta and sent it straight back to Moneta from D.C., you're getting $70 back because of the administrative cost. And to flesh this out, I was speaking to the mayor of a small town in the 5th District, and some of y'all have heard this, but the story bears repeating. And he said, have you seen our crosswalks? And I said, I somehow missed your crosswalks. He said, we got world-class crosswalks. I said, I guess that's good. He said, have you seen where we're putting in our new farmer's market? I said, no, but I love farmer's markets. When we're not in the campaign season, Flan and I usually have a pretty awesome garden. He said, well, we're getting a standing seam steel roof and fans and overhead lighting and a concrete pad. We're going to have a really good farmer's market. I said, that's great. He said, we have 3 vendors. I said, what are you telling me? He said, we got 70-year-old sewer and water, but we got $500,000 from the federal government that had to be used for crosswalks in the farmer's market. Now, when Flint, Michigan happens in Cambridge, Virginia, does it make a sound? So what I'm driving at is, if that money had stayed home, if that money had stayed in the locality or at the state level, would it have been used for something that was more appropriate as a need, right? A real need. Nobody in Bedford or Franklin knows what's needed, or nobody outside of Bedford or Franklin knows what's needed in Bedford and Franklin as well as people in Bedford or Franklin do. So you can talk about shrinking the government. I would talk about shrinking the federal government and powering that money back down to localities where Alta Vista, Virginia can have a regional champion, talking about 2 states in the District of Columbia, robotics team, because they decided that was a priority. Or where Alta Vista, Virginia can chase high-speed internet, and the definition of high speed in Alta Vista by the town is 3.5 times faster than what the federal government definition is. So we need to power down government to the people. The unfortunate tendency of humans, though, is never to say yes when you're taking something away. And so when you have people who try to talk over you, then you can just do this back and forth because you got a microphone. I thought, sir, did I answer your question? Yes. Thank you.
All right. I think Craig Dubos's arm has become dislocated. He's had it up so long, so I'm going to help him out. I'm going to hold on to it, Craig.
Thank you, Congressman Garrett. Glad to finally get the chance to speak to you in person. And I'd like to go back to a line of discussion that was going on earlier. I share your interest in history. And shortly after the inauguration, I began to calling congressional offices. And I always called and spoke to a person. And every time I spoke to someone, I asked them if they could tell me who wrote the following quote. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Not one person could tell me who wrote that. Thomas Jefferson from the Declaration of Independence. So what I'd like to ask you, and what Jefferson was saying here, is that a person's character is very important in the person who holds the highest office in this land. That's what this whole country was founded on, was the value that a person's character was very important. We have a man who is despicable as the president. I would like for you to tell me that Donald Trump portrays the vision that Thomas Jefferson had for the leader of this country.
Please, let's not interrupt or outburst. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to be an equal opportunity discourager of commentary, but I'll tell you that we had what, by all accounts, because there's no evidence based on testimony that I've heard that a single vote was changed anywhere, a free and fair election. We have a set of constitutional parameters within which an individual who seeks office Right. Well, to be I hate moral relativism, but to be fair, the genesis of the character question, I think, first reared its head, at least in recent history, when former President Clinton bet his lip and said, "I'll tell you one last time, and this is the truth, that I didn't," and I'm in a church. So I think the bar. So I think the. And what I'm offering in response is that if you poll this room as to who's disgraced the office of the President of the United States, you get several different answers. So I'm asking you to defend his character. I don't need to defend his character. There are okay.
Craig, he's asked the question.
Here's how questions work: you ask, and then you let people answer. I'm trying. It's succinctly. Okay. There are a series of parameters inside of which one must fall in order to be elected President of the United States. Sometimes people win an election and we don't feel that for other reasons they should be President of the United States. It's happened in my feelings in my lifetime. That has happened here. You feel very strongly that because of his character, Mr. Trump should not be the President of the United States. And I respect those feelings because I too have felt that way. Having said that, there is nothing that he has done or not done that we know of to this point that would prohibit him from being the President of the United States. Therefore, you don't go to war with the army you wish you had, but with the army that you have. President Trump is the President of the United States.
Craig, we're not going to do any more follow-up questions. All right, you had two.
Okay, my name is Genevieve Lyons, and I'm from Charlottesville, and this morning I texted my brother and I said, "Colin, I think I might get to ask my congressman a question today. What should I ask him?" And he's a constitutional conservative, and he's an attorney, and this is what he said I should ask. Under the Constitution, Congress has the sole authority to approve emoluments or gifts by foreign nationals to the president. The president's family was in China over the weekend soliciting investment in projects that will personally benefit the president. Do you consider that an emolument? And if so, is it fair to consider Congress's silence as tacit approval of this practice?
So the distinctions drawn with degrees of separation and essentially tangential versus direct benefit, right? So when your brother or sister becomes the President of the United States, your ability to pursue your livelihood is not compromised thereby. So if we can demonstrate that a solicitation was made for some gift or thing of value that will directly benefit the President of the United States, not tangentially, then there's a violation, right? So theoretically, in the General Assembly, you're disqualified from voting on something that you might have a fiduciary interest in, okay? But you're not disqualified from voting on something that your next door neighbor has an interest in, or that your brother has an interest in, or that your mother has an interest in. So it comes down to what was solicited and who's the direct beneficiary, or is the benefit a potential future benefit, which is lawyer words, in which case there can be no case made against it because they haven't yet vested in the benefit.
We don't have his tax returns, though, so how can we know?
That's right. And so And so after the Charlottesville town hall, we actually filed a bill that would require the disclosure, if not by the candidate, then by the IRS. And the reason we didn't require the candidate to do it is arguably it's unconstitutional. The Constitution sets out the parameters for which you have to be president, but we do have control of what the IRS does. And so that wouldn't be a problem in the future. What you can't do, though, is say, here are the requirements to run for office. Oh, gosh, you ran for office and won. We want to change the requirements. So we actually have taken action on that moving forward. But right now, again, it's not the circumstance we wish we had. It's the circumstance we have.
The business that he's operating has his name on it. And it is like... it's a family empire. They are making money off the presidency. They are. I don't need to see his tax returns to know that.
Right.
But I still want to see his tax returns. And also, I'm a voter of conscience, and I am a person of faith, and I have contacted you many times about the death penalty, and I've not had an answer yet. And if you believe that all life is to be protected, then what about the death penalty?
Okay. Can I...
Let's go ahead and answer one question at a time and ease up on the outburst, please. Thank you.
So is there a death penalty question, or should I circle back around on the business, right?
I'm interested in both. I really
Okay, well, I'll try to get all three of your questions. Okay, we talked about the emoluments clause and whether it's tangential or direct, the beneficiary, whether it's a present vested interest or a potential future interest. That's what triggers any sort of action by the Congress, okay? That's number one. The second one was the family business. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting to me that President Obama's net worth went from
Please, everyone, quiet down, please. Let him answer the question.
Sometimes living in a democracy means hearing things that you don't like. Sometimes living in a democracy means hearing things that you don't like.
Hey, everyone, please.
So I will finish my answer. It's interesting to me that President Obama entered the White House with a net worth of $3 million, and if you take the salary of the president, should have left the White House if he didn't spend a dime with a net worth of just over double that, but instead it was 4 times that. And I'm not accusing him of any wrongdoing. But that's the nature of such. It's true. It's true. Let me just suggest that you Google Obama net worth 2008 and Obama net worth 2016 and ask yourself, sometimes living in a democracy means needing to hear things you don't like. It's uncomfortable, and I'm sorry if it's unpleasant for you. But everything I've told you is true. I invite you to check it out. And so should the family be required to divest itself of years of enterprise and work by virtue of... I disagree. I disagree. I disagree. I disagree. Well, that's okay. Because what I'd like to see is the best people we can get who are willing to serve in office. And if you make people divest themselves of the years of hard work, you will discourage the good behavior of civic service. So that's why I believe what I believe.
All right. Sir.
Okay. Representative Garrett, over here in the corner, way in the corner.
Yes, sir.
I'm Bill Pyatt. I'm from Huddleston. And before I even start the question, I heard what you were saying about the IRS requiring disclosure in the future, and I certainly hope that that passes, because we've obviously identified a loophole here. But anyway, Mr. Trump, when he was running for president, he told us over and over again if we would make him president, he'd go to Washington, he'd drain the swamp, and he would change things there. And likewise, you've told us the same thing, and as a member of the Freedom Caucus, that's what your commitment is also, is to effectively drain the swamp. And no, it's not to drain the swamp.
No, but that's okay. Keep going.
Okay, let me keep going.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Actually, I'm trying to get to tax policy because we didn't really talk about taxes. But anyway, as far as I can tell so far, rather than drain the swamp, what we've seen, what we perceive out here is that the administration has been filled with the same Wall Street bankers and the same corporate lobbyists that got us the recession that we're still recovering from that happened 9 years ago.
Right.
Anyway,
I'm sorry.
About the tax reform, I mean, I want to get to the tax reform because these are the people who are going to end up having to write it. I firmly believe that after 30 years since the last major tax reform, we are long overdue to reset our means of collecting revenues in this economy to fund the needs of the government. We can argue about how big or small that should be, but we all pony up to fund what needs to be funded in the United States. When I paid very close attention to the plan when it was presented on television a couple of weeks ago, and what concerned me the most about what I heard was it seemed to me that the plan presented will only really benefit Mr. Trump and his family and folks like that. And in particular, the AMT, the alternative minimum tax. I hate the alternative minimum tax just like anybody. I also have been trapped by the alternative minimum tax in multiple years because I happen to own some real estate that helps to fund our retirement here. But at the same time, when I look at the little bit that we know about Mr. Trump, if it were not for the alternative minimum tax, he wouldn't be paying any income tax at all. And so as we go into this tax reform, as we move forward on what is a really important agenda item, what I would like to know from you is what are you going to do to protect the forgotten Americans that allegedly this administration ran to protect? How are you going to protect us from having to pay his bills when he gets through writing a tax bill that gets him completely out of all taxes altogether?
Well, to be fair, we only have that 2005 tax return, but on that document, Mr. Trump paid about twice as much as Bernie Sanders, right? I mean, he paid significantly more than Bill and Hillary. It's only true. It's only true.
It was AMT.
Whether it was AMT or not, it's an effective percentage of income earned. But let me get to the crux of that. When you talked about draining the swamp, if President Trump's the only one talking about draining the swamp, we have a problem. That shouldn't be a Freedom Caucus thing or a Trump thing. It should be a bipartisan desire to get a more transparent Washington that works for everyone. That's why I shook my head. That nobody's got the high ground on draining the swamp. But to be fair, that's campaign sort of rhetoric, like yes we can or forward together, and it means to people what they want it to mean to them. So to flesh it out, it should mean that Americans have a right to know within the bounds of national security what the heck's going on in their nation's capital, a right to be sure that the monies that are taken by force of law, right, by power, from them are being spent on things that are important to essentially perpetuate a nation where everyone's receiving the two fundamental entitlements, which to me are an opportunity and a right to define success for yourself within the Jeffersonian construct of freedom. That is, my freedom should extend until it begins to impinge upon the freedom of everyone else. Now, on tax policy, the first tax plan I saw rolled out had reduction from 6 rates to 3 and a drop on the top, a drop on the middle, and an increase on the bottom rate. And I didn't lean no, I leaned hell no, pardon me for being in the sanctuary, on that plan, right? If you want to get into sort of radical outside-the-box thinking, I actually believe in a reverse income tax. I don't believe in raising the minimum wage. Here's why. The minimum wage creates economic opportunity and the ability to let young people experience the workforce. However, if you treat a 28-year-old working mother of 2, single mom of 2, the same way you treat that 17-year-old who's working at the movie theater, the system's broken. What reverse income tax would do is say, let's look at the individual and their circumstance. How much money do we need to augment their income to ensure that they remain in the workforce because it's incentivized, right? So I'm a little bit outside the box on that sort of thing as it relates to tax policy. What there is bipartisan agreement on, literally from President Obama to President Trump, is that the corporate tax rate's busted. And so when you have the highest corporate tax rate in the civilized world, which makes for good political fodder, then ultimately you push money offshore, because the only alternative would be to start nationalizing industry, and that's not working very well in Venezuela, right? So we know that there's an agreement on both sides of the aisle on reform. Trump says 15%, other people say 30%, other people say 25%, but there's an agreement there. Praise goodness, we're going to get something done there. Now, there's another area, and I think based on your comments, your work experiences as a small business person are around that area, and that is, as you said, your C Corp. S corporations, how we treat family-held corporations, and there's about a 3% penalty on family-held corporations versus corporate entities like GE or GM, which is ridiculous, that if your family owns a company, you pay 3% more by double taxation, et cetera. I think I think there's a bipartisan consensus there. But what we really need to do is look at what people on the lowest end of the income tax spectrum are paying, and create a system wherein they're incentivized to continue to work, not penalized for working and pushed out. Because again, if your starting point is everyone's entitled to opportunity and the right to define success within the Jeffersonian construct of your liberty starts where mine stops, and you create a tax structure that disincentivizes people helping themselves, you're undermining the construct.
Describing something very different from what was presented. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, well, if anybody who came here expecting to see Donald Trump, I'm sorry to disappoint you. But yeah.
I'm very glad to hear that, because that's what I'm concerned about.
No,
we need the money not only needs to be spent appropriately and transparently, it needs to be raised equitably.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, there's a million ways to do that. We could talk about consumption taxes and that sort of thing. But when your tax policy ends up pushing people who are on the cusp of breaking out back down, your tax policy is broken, right? And without getting into too personal stories, I know people very well who were on public assistance for years who, at least on paper now, are worth millions of dollars. Again, I don't want to make this too personal, because the system worked. Okay. So if you're looking for somebody to argue against a hand up, I'm not your guy.
So we're at 7:30. That's the published close time. Are you good for another 30 minutes?
Yes, I am.
Roger.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So here's how it's going to work. We're not going to do follow-up questions because there are a lot of people that still have their hands up and want to give everybody a chance, as many people as possible, the opportunity to ask. So what we're going to do is ask the question, he'll answer it, and then we'll move to the next person, okay? It's just so as many people can speak as possible. Yes.
To the extent that anybody here is willing to do it, and this is just me coming out of complete left field, okay, which is what makes Kevin crazy.
I love it.
If anybody would like to talk to me, and you're willing to leave your phone number, and you get a call from an unidentified number, I will try to call you over a period of the coming months, because there's a lot of people here, myself. But what I won't do is give you my cell number. So to the extent you trust us.
All right.
So if somebody from the team could sort of stand at the back and
Stephen Harvey, you're up for that. All right, let's go back here. David Singerman from Charlottesville, Virginia.
So thank you very much. A couple of earlier questions. One gentleman called for draining the swamp. Someone else asked about the emoluments clause. This question is related to that. So just to clarify for what happened to people, what happened in China a couple days ago, the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who, as you know, is one of his closest advisors, just a few days ago, the Kushner family was in China pitching investors on a deal, and the deal was that for a $500,000 investment in a Kushner family property in New Jersey, the family promised to get the Trump administration's State Department to grant a special visa.
Are you talking about EB-5 visa?
So I'm not the expert in immigration law. We're both history majors, but we can talk about that stuff later when you give me a call. So as you know, President Trump ran for president promising to crack down on immigration. But apparently, based on this, that's only an issue if the price isn't right. So my question is whether the fact that the president's closest foreign policy advisor is selling visas to enter the U.S. in exchange for a scheme that would enrich that advisor, who is the president's son-in-law and also the president's daughter, whether that is still not enough to constitute a violation of the emoluments clause, and is it still not enough to make you question the president's judgment on foreign policy?
Where was Jared Kushner? Where was Jared Kushner the last week?
I don't track him personally. He was probably skiing. He's
Jared Kushner wasn't in China. His sister was. And so Sure. No, I want to make sure that because if Jared Kushner was in China, then we need to get rid of...
As a previous questioner said, it's a family property. The family names are all over this thing. And just to clarify, there was a PowerPoint slide in this presentation that pointed to Donald Trump as the key decision maker who they would influence. And I want to make sure that this scheme is still not enough to make you question the president's judgment in foreign policy.
Look, if Jared Kushner goes to China and does this, it's absolutely inexcusable. But to be clear for everyone in this room, Jared Kushner didn't go to China and do this. Now, if you can demonstrate to me that Jared Kushner had knowledge that his sister was doing this and approved of it, then that would be sufficient. I know that everybody in here, I have a sister, and I'm aware of everything my sister's always done, including right now. That was tongue-in-cheek. So ultimately, the question becomes, what did he know and whether he approved of it? That's the question. Right? I was a prosecutor forever, and I can tell you all kinds of people who hung out with all kinds of bad people who I can't send to prison because being related to them just doesn't meet that barrier.
But if it turned out...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. On the record, if it turned out that Kushner knew that his sister was parlaying that family relationship into money, then they need to go. Now, let me digress for a moment. I've seen all this before. And there are EB-5 visas where you pay $500,000 and you get an expedited path to citizenship. And you know where I saw it? A company called Green Tech Automotive. And do you know who the principal in Green Tech Automotive was, who was selling visas and using influence? It was Terry McAuliffe, who was using influence with the Clinton administration.
David, you've asked like 3 questions.
Let me finish. I think you'll like where I go with this. And I said, that by itself disqualifies Terry McAuliffe for being governor. So if Jared Kushner knew that his sister was in the business of peddling EB-5 visas for financial return to the family, then yes, we've hit that line that you asked about. Absolutely. Unequivocally. Say again? I presume it's under investigation along with everything else, but sure. But here's the thing. We can request an investigation, or it can be settled on the front end, probably by virtue of the sister and her business partners saying, yes, my brother knew, oh crap, we need to do something, or no, that was really stupid, we shouldn't have done it. But yeah, I think you're right. That is a threshold moment. I traveled to Northern Virginia and did a press conference and said people shouldn't be in the business of using political influence, the Clintons, to sell access to the United States to put money in their pockets. And the paradigm was Governor McAuliffe.
All right, I'm Jack Shanahan. I'm a junior at Franklin County High School. I'm very honored to talk to you, and thank you for your service. When I was in the womb, my mother was told that I would have terminally illness and all kinds of bad stuff about me, and that and the doctor suggested that I should be aborted. Luckily, being a good Catholic Christian mom, she didn't, and I'm fine today. Basically, my question to you is, what is the agenda on, because I'm not for it because of my own experience, what is the agenda on Planned Parenthood and abortions moving forward?
Well, the federal subsidization of Planned Parenthood is kind of like the federal subsidization of the automotive industry. Both are profit-making entities. Right, so I don't know why we're in the business of it, and it's important to me, based on what I told you as it relates to my values, to subsidize behavior that other people find objectionable, particularly when I find that there is a legitimate government interest based on our foundational concepts that life is a fundamental right in preserving life. Having said that, let me just tell you that your story is just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. But to the extent that we fight to hope that folks will recognize the sanctity of life, we need to stop and in passing judgment on individuals who make decisions differently than those that we wish they might have made. We need to stop, because until you walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, and I'm not justifying it, and my pro-life opinion won't change, but if the God that I believe in is correct and all sin is equal, then the hypocrisy of talking to somebody as if they're less than you because they made a decision different than you wish they would have made is overwhelming, and the nature of the outcome of that I don't think is constructive. We need to love people because we're all broken as we would love ourselves. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to speak to what you said, to say, don't judge another human being for making a different decision. Instead, talk about why you believe what you believe, and then love them just like you would anybody else, because there's nobody here perfect. Secondarily, the moment that it really vested for me was with a very good friend of mine who has a severe disability, and a bill that we attempted to pass in the Virginia General Assembly, assuring essentially the right to funding from taxpayers for abortions of this young man, wherein one of my colleagues in the General Assembly stood up and said, tragically, some people are unfit for life. And my friend, with assistance, made his way to the podium and said, I fit the definition of unfit for life. Who are you to be the arbiter of who is and is not fit for life? And I'll tell you that if that doesn't hit you somewhere, regardless of how you feel, check yourself. But don't to judge people. It makes me so mad when I watch people who purport to have values denigrate others for making a different decision that they weren't a part of the process of it. We need to love people and welcome them. Sorry.
Good evening, Congressman Garrett. I'm James from Rustburg. Thank you for what you're doing for the 5th District. To jump right to my question, attending Liberty University, I'm able to meet a lot of students every day, and a lot of these students have become my best friends. Each semester, I'm struck by meeting a handful, 5 or more, that have lost a mother or father, a sister or brother, or family member because of suicide after they've served in the armed forces. Our VA has failed us and is making headlines because of this. What do you intend to do to help our men and women that have served, that are facing awful PTSD and other health concerns after they retire our uniform, but have gone ready to make the ultimate sacrifice and to protect us to have the right to civilly disagree here today?
So when I got out of the military, I officially got out off of IRR, Individual Ready Reserve, in January of 2002. So on September 11, 2001, while I'd been a year off active duty, I still had a service obligation. And I candidly felt guilty because a lot of my friends either didn't get out or went back in. And I always felt like, why are they there doing what they're doing to protect us, and I'm not? And so I would track the casualties, and sadly, there was no way to track casualties that I could find other than a website called pigsty.net. And so occasionally I would go to this website and fearfully, and then, you know, on an occasion saw someone with whom I served listed as a casualty in Iraq. And I remember that day almost like I remember September 11th because of my relationship and friendship with Staff Sergeant Kendall Thomas. And it strikes me that it's tragic when you worry about service members in uniform, but you stop worrying about them when they're out of uniform, when you live in a world where there are 22 suicides a day. So what I wanted to do, and I heard some people mumbling answer the question, was sort of point out that we think about our men and women in uniform and we care about them when they're in harm's way, and then when they get home, we stop and they're still dying. And so let me make a really bright line distinction in the VA in one way, and that is not too long ago I visited with my father-in-law in a VA facility, and he couldn't have been happier with his caregivers, the doctors and nurses on the front lines in the VA. Having said that, we have people dying on the floor in the hallways in a VA facility in North Carolina that actually serves residents from the 5th District. The problem is that the administrative inefficiencies are massive, and human beings get lost. And when a service member or former service member identifies that sort of PTSD, which can lie dormant until some small thing happens and goes to get care, they need it when they need it, not when they get it. And so what are we doing? The Service Members' Choice Initiative essentially is starting to broaden options for service members who can't get the care in the VA in a timely manner and allow them to seek care in the private sector. That's a start. What we talked about during the campaign and what we've continued to discuss as a legislative sort of concept is an outside eye on the administrative process. I think where there's inefficiency that borders on criminal corruption, that organizations tend to collapse on themselves and defend themselves. And so where it's not the doctors and the nurses and the physician's assistants in the VA, but it's the paperwork and administrative folks, we need somebody from the outside to come in and look over the shoulder of those people. Having said that, what we find with inefficiency in VA systems is oftentimes it parallels veterans' population centers. I spoke with a veteran yesterday who said Western Virginia, pretty good, Richmond, nah, and when you get to Hampton Roads, it's horrible. And I said, what does that have to do with the fact that the veteran population in Hampton Roads is massive? And he said, it has a lot to do with it. So we also need to look where we send the resources and make sure where concentrations of population are where we're concentrating effort and resources. But yeah, it's a crazy world when you can't stop worrying about the well-being of servicemen and women when they come home, but you need to keep on, and it's inexcusable. And so again, Veterans Choice, where we offer more access to private services to expedite the receipt of care, and some additional oversight on the administrative process, certainly administrative reform, which would be beyond the purview of any one individual in Congress, but if a bunch of us call for it, we should be able to get it done. That is, if it ain't working the way you do it differently. I will tell you that the worst thing that we could have is people in Congress telling them how to do it, right? Instead, we need to tell them to do it and then let the people who know how tell them how. But those are all things that we support and that we need to continue doing.
Congressman Garrett, I thank you for being here. I encourage you to do more of these town halls. It's important for the dialogue between both sides. So please do more of them and allow more people in. I want to speak for a moment a little bit about your background and then my own, and then I'll get to my question. You served on the Education and Health Committee in the Virginia General Assembly, and you currently serve on the Education Workforce Committee in the U.S. Congress. I am a 23-year educator. These young men were in my middle school. I'm glad they're here, even though our opinions differ greatly based on our nods. I defend their right to their opinions, and I taught history and government for 18 years and have been a middle school administrator for the last 5. To this gentleman's question, you cited the U.S. Department of Education as a place to cut. I know that during the McDonnell years and the McDonnell budget, some of the strings that were tied to the Race to the Top funds kept you all from cutting us even greater in Virginia public schools. There were also some other parameters that kept you all from cutting us so deeply under the McDonnell budget. You didn't support all of that, but you did support some of it. What do you see as the role of the federal government in funding support for public schools to ensure special education support, mental health support? We have students with great needs. I could tell you tragic stories. You and I will talk about that when you call me, about our children who come to us from foster care, from neglect and abuse that is beyond. I don't even know how they put their shoes on and come in my building every morning. But what I want to know is how do you see the federal government's role in securing and ensuring support for special ed, mental health, other needs, including workforce development for these young men and others, so that all of our children can become productive members of our society? They are the human capital infrastructure we should be talking about, and no one is talking about them and their future. They're sitting with $20 million in national debt. We can't use that as an excuse not to invest in them. How are we going to do it, and what do you see the federal government's role?
So first of all, with all due respect, I completely disagree with your characterization of how the McDonnell budget was drafted and where the money came from. But fair, right? I mean, all right. I know you're shocked. Okay. But I do think some people are talking about their future, because that's exactly what we're talking about with student security and lifting that debt cloud from off these young people's heads so that they can be engaged in the idea development world that will ultimately lead to economic development, job development, and opportunity development, right? There's nobody talking about that in Washington except for us and Senator Sanders. But acknowledge the problem and address the problem. Because the sooner these guys are unencumbered from personal debt, the sooner they'll be able to contribute essentially to the perpetuation of that opportunity to which every American is entitled, right? As it relates to the federal government's role, I'll ask you sincerely, if you could receive the same number of dollars, but receive them from the locality or for the state versus the federal government, and have strings not come from the federal, state, and local government, but only from the state government or the local government or the state and local government, which would you choose? And it can be rhetorical, but I don't want it. I'm not trying to quiet you. But the paradigm is that No Child Left Behind left children behind. And so that's a massive federal co-opting of decision-making authority, not just from Virginia, but from Bedford, from Franklin, from Campbell. And again, the road to hell is paved with omnibus legislation. If you want to turn the ship around, it's a lot easier to turn it in the county or in the state than it is federally. So, yeah, I would, again, it's not a zero-sum game. It's from where the money comes that dictates how much money gets the field. And let's give her a follow-up, but let me, in the military, the analogy is the teeth of the dragon versus the tail of the dragon. The tail of the dragon is the logistics, trains, gas, beans, bullets, all the stuff that the teeth, the combat arms branches need to engage and destroy the enemy. And you want to have a ratio where there's as much tooth as you can have with as little tail as you need to support it. The bigger we make the education pyramid as it extends up towards federal, the more tail, the less teeth. You, as a teacher in the classroom, you're the one that's making the biggest difference, not the administrator, the thousands of people making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in DEA or in the Department of Education, DOE in Washington, D.C. We need to take care of you, not the person who never sees the inside of the classroom. And that's what I'm talking about, is powering that money down to the localities where the rubber meets the road. Does there need to be some administration? Yes. But when there's, as we look at the upward cost and per pupil expenditures, the city of Richmond is spending more per pupil than Hanover County. Hanover County is getting better outcomes. The city of Richmond has, and I'm pulling numbers out of thin air here, but I'm in the ballpark, 20 deputy superintendents, and Hanover's got 4. Each one's making, you know what I'm saying? So that's $2 million that didn't get into the classroom in Richmond. There you go. So let her, again, you can follow up.
I guess, but 2 follow-ups. I would like to hear more about your thoughts about funding special education and mental health, because under the new healthcare and the repeal of ACA, we will lose funding for some of the OT, some of the other types of day treatment counselors that help our children get through the day. The other piece I would say is that there may be places to cut fat. I taught for 18 years in the classroom, the last 5 as an administrator. There aren't enough of us to run that middle school. Some of the students in here can attest to that. The other piece I would say about your question to me about the funding, the General Assembly's record over the last 20 years has not been very good on taking new monies and putting it toward K through 12, nor has my locality. We may see more dollars, but the percentage of the overall pie that we represent each year in both the state and the local budgets that I'm under shrink every year. Education as a percentage is shrinking because money is going other places.
What county are you in?
I'm in Franklin.
Okay.
I don't know how to stop that, but I'm telling you that has to stop. We've got to invest in our human capital future. Yep. They are our infrastructure. So if you would just
right. So the cuts, the specific cuts we've talked about aren't in the schools; they're in Washington D.C. Right? And I'll tell you, Google search how many people work for the Department of Education, and then check the average salary, and then think what we could do in the classroom with that money. That money needs to get down. Now, again, there's a need for administration. I asked what county you're in because, and I'll divorce myself of this nightmare. The composite index is ridiculous, and Franklin County is a county that kind of takes it on the chin because people on Smith Mountain Lake make Franklin County look a whole lot richer than it is. So the state share of money coming down isn't what it would be in another locality that didn't happen to have a beautiful lake. So that's something that needs to be looked at, but that there is a state level problem. As it relates to mental health, one of the greatest honors I had in the General Assembly was out of tragedy the year that my colleague Senator Deed's family went through the circumstance they did, being asked to chair the mental health subcommittee, where we tried to look at, and we did, reform that would make sure that we had, and this is a net, not a solution, had the beds available for people when there was an acute crisis, so that you didn't have people turned away and create circumstances like what manifests itself with his family, right? So we've started touching on that at the state level. I look around this room, not just at you people who are professional educators, God bless you, but at the law enforcement community and how many interactions they have with folks with mental health issues who we missed. And some of the stories I've heard as a prosecutor for a number of years and being very good friends with a lot of law enforcement professionals with things they experienced by virtue of that. So ultimately, it's kind of like trying to figure out a way to get folks to go to the doctor's office instead of the emergency room because you save 20-fold money. Getting in front of mental health issues, the savings justifies the expense. So the question becomes, where are the programs that work? Because the back-end expense is, a horrific tragedy in a family, or a person who has potential to contribute who dies young because they self-medicated, or it's just bad after bad after bad. So on the mental health side of things, and another area where I'm a big advocate is community health care centers. I know it's not related, but solving problems cost efficiently to prevent bigger problems down the road. That's an area where I think we do need to invest. The question becomes the appropriate level of government at which to make the investment.
All right, we got one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. Go ahead and stand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Congressman. My name's Kelsey Cowger. I live in Nelson County. I was disturbed by the comments you made on MSNBC a couple days ago, where you seemed to dismiss the concerns of the healthcare needs of your constituents who didn't vote for you. What I'm wondering is what you think your responsibility is to the people who didn't vote for you or might not support you now. Do you think you need to take their concerns into account?
So I would invite you to actually watch the story from which the internet meme arises, and then we'll rewatch it, because I'm not being interviewed by the recorded segment. I'm being interviewed by Stephanie Rule, and her question was, but these people elected you, to which I responded, based on geography and math, I actually doubt that those people did vote for me, which is only true. It's just true, right? My job is to run for office and say, these are the things I believe in. If elected, these are the things I'll do. And then when I get to Washington, D.C., do exactly what I said I would. And whether you like it or not, that's exactly what I'm doing. What I owe you is my time, my ear, my candor. And I should keep my word, whether, and I'll tell you one thing I'm proud of. By gosh, guys, from the office, how many angry emails we got after the Charlottesville town hall when I said, okay, if we think that the president should close their tax returns, we'll do something about it, and we dropped the bill. What I owe you is doing what I said I would do, and that I'm doing. And again, and I'm not to be trite, but if I don't get reelected, that's okay, right? And I know there are people who think it's great. I'm going to do the job the best I can do it. When I tell you that I actually am trying to push down costs and increase access to care, not coverage, I mean it. And you might think the methods by which he does this are completely out of whack with what I think is right. And the beauty of this is, in 8 months in the Balkans, where I watched people who looked alike and who largely sounded alike, but who worship differently, kill each other, I thought, praise God in America that we can fight for our rights to believe different things whilst not fighting each other over them, and that's what we got. So that's a good thing.
Just remind you, you're in a gerrymandered district.
I didn't gerrymander. I want to talk to that, Kev.
All right.
Anybody think I drew this map? I love this whole district. The district is super double gerrymandered. I didn't draw the map. Okay. Right. Ultimately, if you can find a way to draw a district that that includes any part of the district that's identical to that part of the district. Let me tell you, while I'm on this, what I would support. If you have a nonpartisan redistricting commission, it's just as partisan as the people that appointed the nonpartisans. What I would support is if the parties could get together and agree on criteria. Let's define communities of interest. Let's define geographical proximity. Let's define economic interest, and then plug the data into a program and have the program tell us what makes sense. That's nonpartisan.
All right. Thank you all. Everybody that has questions, anybody that has questions can meet with Stephen Harvey, not from Family Feud, out on by the table where you came in and gave your ID. Tom, did you want to say anything 2 minutes before we go?
Thank you. Thank you to every one of you. And I want you to, if you leave with anything, and it can be vehement disagreement, please know we've put thought into these things, and we might arrive at different conclusions, but that's kind of what makes this country awesome. Thank you.
Just give Steve. Just give Stephen your name and phone number, and the congressman will call you. It will take a little while.